it completely.
Bruce, the U.S. isn't ruling out giving Moscow legal binding guarantees that its missile defense shield won't be directed against Russia. But it says a cooperation agreement should be signed first. Does it look like the impasse will be broken soon?
I don't think so. I think the U.S. intends to continue surrounding Russia and China with these so-called missile defense systems, claiming that they're really aimed at Iran. But we know that Iran has no nuclear weapons today, and they have no missiles capable of hitting the United States. So indeed, this system is aimed at Russia. I believe it has a lot to do with the fact that Russia has the world's largest supply of natural gas. And don't we know by now that the Pentagon's primary job today is to serve as a resource extraction service on behalf of corporate globalization?
Why do you think Washington is so slow in giving Russia these guarantees?
Because I don't think they intend to give Russia those guarantees. In fact, what I see happening now inside the United States, using the mainstream media, I see Russia and China being demonized over and over again by the U.S. I think the strategy is to make the American people feel that Russia and China are the aggressors. We find that it's virtually impossible to get any mainstream media coverage over this U.S. encirclement of Russia and China. I just finished a 30-day speaking tour from San Diego in California all the way to Seattle and Washington, 24 cities, where I spoke about this very U.S. encirclement with missile defense systems of Russia and China, and the mainstream media would not touch this issue and the speaking tour that I did. So the American people really know very little about it, but instead we hear a lot about how Russia and China are expanding their military, which of course is happening largely because the U.S. is militarily encircling both those countries today.
Now, Moscow says it will develop brand new weapons to counter the missile shield over concerns the shield could intercept current technology. Does this have the hallmarks of a new arms race here?
Sadly, I think it does. I'm against any country developing more weapons these days. We don't need a new arms race. We have a big problem on this planet called climate change that we need all the countries of the world to help deal with. But in fact, when you're being surrounded, as Russia and China is today, one begins to understand why they feel the need to increase their military, especially when the United States Space Command is wargaming a first strike attack on China every year now for the past several years, set in the year 2016. So, in fact, when they're wargaming a first strike attack at the same time that Russia and China are being surrounded, you can understand why those two countries feel like they have to respond.
A lot of military hardware in the area already in place. How possible is it that an attack on Iran is really being considered?
Well, I think we have to be very cautious how we analyze that news. There was a front page article in the London Daily Mail yesterday saying that the US and the UK were drawing up joint plans to attack Iran. Now, this has been going on for more than 4 years now. These permanent threats against Iran on the part of Israel, who are calling for a preemptive strike. That's what Mr. Netanyahu said only 2 days ago. And it all coincides with the debacle of Israeli attack on southern Lebanon in 2006. So I think we have to be very cautious and basically understand that what Iran is the cornerstone of probably what is an ongoing, very tough negotiation to move forward towards a world government where Russia and China are not going to bow in very easily to the Western powers. And Iran is the cornerstone because contrary to Iraq, which was on its own, Saddam Hussein, contrary to Libya and Afghanistan, Iran has definitely a very strong commercial and trade agreement with China, and it has a very strong trade agreement with Russia, and although it's not official, it probably has some sort of military alliance with Russia too. So I think that what we are seeing is we are probably edging closer to what might become a full-fledged war in the region, even a world war where Iran is the cornerstone if it is attacked by Israeli, American, British, or a combination of all three forces in the near future.
It is very interesting how you bring Russia and China into this, basically describing the massive trade agreements between Iran and China and Russia. Certainly, if the West did try and attack Iran, it would certainly flare tempers in two of the biggest world powers, that of Russia and China. Now, moments ago, you mentioned the issue of Israel. If Israel did unilaterally attack Iran, as we know just a few days ago, it test-fired this new intercontinental missile, do you think America would have to support its closest ally? Would it have to be involved?
America supports Israel unconditionally in the diplomatic, strategic, military, financial spheres. There is a whole line of thought in America from academic Stephen Walt of Harvard University and John Mearsheimer of Chicago University that says that Zionist influence through AIPAC, the American-Israeli Public Affairs Commission, is so strong that it has succeeded in making American foreign policy prioritize the national interest of Israel over the national interest of the United States. Now, the United States is not so much bent on war, public opinion, against Iran, but Israel is. So one can envision that Israel is a wild card. It might unilaterally attack Iran. It will then bear a counterattack, which will be ferocious from Iran against Israel. And then the Western media will plan the whole thing out so that it will drag public opinion from America and Europe to support Israel. And what can happen after that is anybody's guess, because we don't know what Russia will do. We don't know what China will do. We don't even know what Pakistan and India will do.
Now,
and they are nuclear powers.
So you bring in the more regional and even a global perspective here. But we saw the American-backed NATO effort in Libya. Just over the past week or so, we've been seeing the reports from a UN nuclear watchdog about Syria and an alleged nuclear plant there that actually for the past 2 decades has been a cotton mill. Now the UN nuclear watchdog talking about a possible strike on Iran. Just what is the geopolitical global agenda here coming from the West?
Well, I think that basically we have a global power elite that is embedded in the United States, embedded in the United Kingdom, and in many countries of Europe, but is not part of the United States, Britain, and the European Union. They are bent on world government, and they use the U.S. military prowess to try to achieve that, and NATO's prowess to try to achieve that. Now, what we have seen in Libya is very different from what can happen with Iran, because Gaddafi committed the same mistake that Saddam Hussein is, and that's being alone in the crossfire. But Iran is not Iraq, Iran is not Libya, and things will be very different. And I even believe that perhaps in their desperation, they are looking towards a World War III scenario, because as happened with World War II, it is an opportunity to kick the chessboard and reshuffle all the cards. And I suppose that this global power elite bent on world government will try to reshuffle all the cards in their favor.
No such place. The British forces, American forces, NATO forces, they're around us everywhere. They're surrounding Iran. And those same forces say Iran is interfering in the internal affairs of the region. What can we say to that?
Dr. Tang Dan-kun, you're the Director and Research Fellow of the Center for Arms Control, China Institute of International Studies, and it's great to have you with us today.
Yeah, me too.
So Russia and China have found themselves recently in the same camp trying to prevent a possible military intervention into Syria. Do you think it's a short-lived partnership, or maybe a greater strategic vision that could actually consequently affect the distribution of power worldwide?
Since we share the same responsibility, we're facing the same challenges. For example, we learn lessons from the Libya case. Last year, the military intervention by the Western countries did give us lessons. How can we safeguard the peace and stability in regional affairs? So this time, I'm sure the two countries can exchange their ideas toward the regional dispute to prevent any conflict or war.
Well, one occasionally still hears that the Western countries still may invade Syria going around the UN resolution, like it has happened in Iraq, for example. What instruments do China and Russia, except their common standpoint on Syria, what other instruments do they have to actually prevent this from happening?
Yeah, China has been very active in the negotiations in finding peaceful solution, not only Syria, Libya dispute, but also in Iran nuclear issue. China this time actually is a mediator or coordinator. I think China is acceptable to all the parties concerned, to Iran, to Russia, to the United States. To my knowledge, there were several rounds of dialogue, among the parties concerned related to the Iranian nuclear issue. And China changed a little bit its attitude to be more active at this time because China's position, China's policy toward the regional affairs are more acceptable to all the parties concerned.
Another issue that China and Russia are commonly worried about is, of course, the American anti-missile defense system. We're hearing about the United States plans to actually build an early warning radar in South Japan, and at the same time Russia is increasingly worried about United States plans to enhance its missile defense capabilities in Europe. Do you think that China and Russia could maybe come up with a joint reaction to this plan, or each country should deal with that on their own?
Yeah, actually, this is a question I asked to your Vice Foreign Minister, whether China and Russia can join together to establish a counting missile defense system. He didn't give me a direct answer. Maybe there are a lot of obstacles on the way for China and Russia to cooperate in this regard. For example, political obstacles and the technical obstacles. I don't think at this moment the two countries' militaries prefer to share their missile information, the data. Maybe Russia would like to share the information with the United States because you have a START treaty. But I think Russia and China now are facing the same challenge. The missile defense project, started 10 years ago, 20 years ago. Actually, in the eyes of your country, of Russian, of Chinese, is really a bad program, which will deteriorate or destroy the strategic stability among big powers.
How far do you think the United States is willing to go in confronting both Russia and China in this issue?
I think it's a strategic step by the United States from the two sides. Russia and China, live on the same continent, Eurasia continent, and from the Europe side, they deployed the missile defense system, in some European countries, and in Asia Pacific region, another side of the Eurasia continent. They deployed the missile defense system in Alaska, deployed the missile defense systems in Japan, South Korea, and even China's Taiwan. So they tried to squeeze the Eurasian continent. Actually, the two big powers, Russia and China, in the eyes of the United States nowadays are major challenges for their security. So this time, the United States just try to contain the two countries. Of course, missile defense is not only a military project. I think it's a political project. It's also a technical project. So this time, I don't think this is a good project for the international relations at this moment.
The economic crisis in Eurozone is another huge topic that has actually really got to everyone around, and it has also undermined Chinese demand in Chinese export. But on the other hand, it's an opportunity for the Chinese to invest. So maybe could this, for you, this crisis be more an opportunity than a problem?
I think a Chinese attitude toward the European crisis, financial crisis, has been very cautious. There are a lot of seminars and workshops and a lot of ideas whether China should give financial support, economic support to the financial crisis zone, especially the European countries. But I think so far the Chinese government has been very cautious toward these ideas. I can give you another example. trade with our neighboring countries, with Japan, we are now suffering the island dispute, during the previous year. But the trade between the two countries is still increasing, even today.